9 building collapses hit Sicily in just 13 months between January 2025 and February 2026. One every 6 weeks on average, and the worst of them, a catastrophic landslide in the town of Niscemi, forced over 1,600 residents from their homes and left behind an estimated €2 billion in damage. What makes all of this even harder to accept is that scientists and geologists had been sounding the alarm about exactly these kinds of events for decades, and almost nothing was done. The causes run deep. Aging infrastructure, rampant illegal construction, dangerous geology, and a climate shifting faster than anyone predicted all collided at once. So let's walk through what happened, why it happened, and why the people of Sicily are running out of time. On January 21, 2025, a gas leak set off an explosion in Catania's San Giovanni Palermo district that leveled a 3-story public housing building. 14 people were injured, among them a 66-year-old man who suffered severe facial burns, and roughly 150 residents had to evacuate the surrounding area. Gas company crews had already arrived to investigate the leak when the blast tore through the structure, and Catania prosecutors opened a criminal investigation almost immediately. That explosion turned out to be just the first in a long chain. A house in Caltanissetta crumbled during heavy storms only days earlier, on January 17th. An abandoned building gave way in Palma di Montechiaro the following month. Then on March 9th, a 2-story historic structure at Palermo's Piazza Maggiore partially buckled, sending tufo stone blocks crashing onto parked cars below. None of that should shock anyone familiar with Palermo's historic center, where 228 buildings carry the official designation dangerously unstable. Another 100 or so are labeled simply unstable, and over 900 sit in a state of general decay. The collapses kept coming through spring and summer. Moisture-rotted wooden beams in Trapani failed at 2:50 in the morning on May 29th, pancaking one floor onto the next. A gelato shop explosion in Palermo's Arenella district on June 12th triggered a partial building collapse, and 12 days later, on June 24th, a false ceiling inside Palermo's main hospital, the Policlinico, caved in without warning. Union representatives described that one as a near miss that could easily have killed someone. One incident carried weight beyond the immediate damage. On May 15, 2025, a perimeter wall at a former hospital in Agrigento gave way during an orange weather alert, taking a stretch of adjacent road with it. The building had been undergoing conversion into a University of Palermo campus under a €4.27 million contract. Investigators later concluded that crews had excavated too deep while installing water cisterns, undermining the wall's foundations entirely. 12 people now face criminal charges for deliberate building collapse and negligent damage, and the list of defendants includes the University of Palermo's rector, Massimo Mediri. All of those events, as serious as they were, got dwarfed by what unfolded in Niscemi. Niscemi sits in Caltanissetta province in southern Sicily, a town of about 26,000 people perched above the plain of Gela. Starting January 16, 2026, landslides began chewing away at the area, and Provincial Road 12 collapsed first. Then, Cyclone Harry rolled in between January 18th and 21st, dumping record rainfall across southern Italy. Neighboring Calabria recorded up to 570 millimeters in 72 hours alone. What happened next had been building for a very long time. On January 25th, a massive landslide reactivated along a 4-kilometer front on Niscemi's southern flank, right along an old fault line that geologists had flagged for decades. Italian officials estimated roughly 350 million cubic meters of earth shifted, although that figure is so large it still awaits independent verification. Buildings in the Sante Croce and Belvedere neighborhoods wound up dangling over the edge of a newly formed cliff, and authorities locked down a 150-meter red zone around the most dangerous stretch. By January 31st, a 3-story building that had hung over the precipice for days finally gave way and tumbled into the void. The very next morning, February 1st, a second 3-story structure followed it down. Roberto Palumbo, the 76-year-old architect who owned that building, told reporters, "Today, my heart collapsed too. My life was in there." 1,600 displaced residents filled emergency shelters, many of them at the Piola Torre Sports Hall, while 323 school children transferred to alternative facilities across the area. Ground sensors confirmed the landslide remained active into early February 2026, and civil protection officials admitted that many of the affected homes would never be recoverable. And this is where the negligence becomes impossible to ignore. That exact location suffered a major landslide back in 1997 that displaced 400 people and destroyed dozens of buildings. Remediation fund allocated after that disaster arrived in December 2025, 28 years later. Construction continued on the same fragile clay and marl terrain the entire time. Geologist Giuseppe Calura of the Sicily Italian Society of Environmental Geology put it plainly when he noted there had always been a high probability these events would repeat in these areas. Fabio Siciliano, head of Italy's Civil Protection Department, went further, declaring that the entire hill was collapsing onto the plain of Gela. Two forces are working in tandem to destabilize Sicily's ground, and both are accelerating. University of Catania researchers confirmed in a 2024 study that between 2013 and 2023, Sicily's rainfall patterns underwent a fundamental shift from a 4-season cycle to what amounts to a 2-season cycle, with summer and autumn precipitation spiking in ways typical of tropical climates rather than the Mediterranean. Legambiente's 2025 report tallied 376 extreme weather events across Italy that year, placing Sicily among the 3 hardest-hit regions. The real damage comes from what scientists call the Drought-Deluge cycle. Sicily's 2024 drought was classified by the World Weather Attribution Initiative as 1 in a 100-year event, made roughly 50% more likely by climate change. During that drought, the island's widespread clay soils shrank and cracked deep beneath the surface. When Cyclone Harry then saturated those same soils months later, water poured straight into those fractures and the ground destabilized almost overnight. Sicily's geological exposure stretches well beyond landslides. Eastern Sicily occupies Italy's highest seismic risk zone, Zone 1, with peak ground acceleration reaching 0.28 g. INGV modeling of a repeat of the catastrophic 1693 Val di Noto earthquake projects over 400,000 casualties and 300,000 homeless, given the current state of the building stock. Mount Etna, Europe's most active volcano, compounds the threat. A 2018 earthquake tied to Etna's activity displaced over 600 people and damaged buildings across multiple villages. Coastal erosion eats away at about 29% of Sicily's 1,400-kilometer coastline, and parts of the southeast are sinking at up to 8 millimeters per year. The geology would be dangerous enough on its own, but Sicily's building stock turns natural risk into guaranteed disaster. 60% of residential buildings across Italy went up before 1971, years before the country adopted its first real seismic code in 1974. The current seismic code only took full effect in July 2009, and existing buildings face no retrofitting requirement unless they undergo major structural work. Cresmi data puts the number of Sicilian buildings in poor or mediocre condition at 48,800, more than double the next worst regions in the country. Illegal construction amplifies the problem to an almost absurd degree. ISTAT figures from 2022 show Sicily recording about 48 illegal dwellings for every 100 authorized ones, which means that for roughly every 2 legal buildings that go up, 1 illegal structure appears alongside them. Legambiente documented over 1,000 construction-related crimes on the island in 2022 alone, working out to nearly 4 per day, a 25.7% jump over the previous year. Enforcement barely exists. Between 2004 and 2020, only about 21% of demolition orders were actually carried out across Sicily. Over 50,000 illegal buildings line the island's coasts in zones where construction has been banned since 1976, and just 0.3% of them have been removed. 3 national amnesties for illegal builders, passed in 1985, 1994, and 2003, effectively rewarded the very behavior that created this crisis in the first place. Price tag for fixing it lands somewhere between staggering and impossible. Seismically retrofitting all Italian homes would cost an estimated 93.7 billion euros, according to the National Engineers Council. And the broader estimate from Niscemi for full seismic safety across all risk zones ranges from 937 billion euros to over 1 trillion euros. Italy's government declared a state of emergency on January 26, 2026, covering Sicily, Sardinia, and Calabria, with an initial allocation of 100 million euros spread across all three regions. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni flew to Niscemi on January 28, surveyed the landslide by helicopter, and described the funding as just the first step. The criticism arrived fast. Opposition leader Elly Schlein demanded the government redirect 1 billion euros currently earmarked for the controversial Messina Strait Bridge project toward the storm-devastated regions instead. Greenpeace Italia accused officials of prioritizing fossil fuel infrastructure over climate adaptation. Gioacchino Crescimoni, a local biologist and Niscemi resident, captured the frustration of the displaced when he told reporters, "They knew this was a fragile spot. They needed to do something." Prosecutors in nearby Gela opened a criminal investigation into the Niscemi disaster. No new building safety legislation had been enacted as of early February 2026, though the Conference of Regional Assembly Presidents scheduled extraordinary discussions. Sicilian Regional Assembly President Gaetano Galvagno invited all Italian Regional Council presidents to visit Niscemi on February 12, declaring that few regions in Italy had truly understood what happened in Sicily. Sicily's building collapse crisis does not amount to a run of bad luck or a string of freak accidents. 48,800 degraded buildings, nearly one illegal structure for every 2 legal ones, clay soils hammered by accelerating drought and deluge cycles, all of it sitting in one of Europe's most seismic active zones. The pattern was visible for years, and the warnings were loud. 100 million euros allocated against 2 billion euros in damage from this round alone tells you everything about the gap between response and reality, especially when the National Seismic Retrofitting Bill sits at 93 billion euros. Nobody died in these collapses, and that fact owes everything to effective evacuations and the gradual nature of the Niscemi slide, not to prevention or planning. That is pure luck, and luck, as history keeps proving, runs out.